And we're live. I wasn't sure I was going live today, but I thank anybody who is joining us. I am happy to have Mike Hruby here today. That he is with New Jobs America, and Mike, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So a little bit of background, even like you just gave me on New Jobs America, because I know you're in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So a lot of the people I've had on are, other than Kim, I think they've all been in California dealing with AB5 and that kind of stuff. So Kim has been very helpful in the AB5 stuff as well, but she's also had her own ton of stuff she's brought to the podcast on New Jersey alone.
Yes.
So we all are very familiar with what's going on in Massachusetts, because it very directly will affect the gig economy too. I mean,
Yes.
already they're pulling out. Both sides are already starting to waste the money, just like they did before. Because I consider all that wasted money, not just the Prop 22 money, but the money that the states spent and all of it. It was just all, you know. And then to watch people that I very much not only have enjoyed speaking with, but have become friends with, like Gail Gordon.
Yes.
Watch her, her nonprofit just be destroyed
Yes.
over a law where she's carrying on a musical style that probably without her, I hate to say, might die.
I am sure that your suspicion is correct. And
Um,
music in general, performing music is going to be crushed by this. Uh,
yeah,
my background is, I'm the son of three generations of professional performing musicians, and they all chose it. They all did very well at it. Famous music, Hrubys were famous musical family in Cleveland. So I've seen this thing up at close and personal since before I can remember. So, and
yeah.
Gail's part of that, you know.
And with Gail though, there's even a bigger little catch that bothers me, which is she's a 501c3 nonprofit.
Hmm.
So even a nonprofit who does a very, very unique niche of opera that was passed down from the camps during World War II,
Yes.
and this music will die. I mean, even that niche and a nonprofit still got shut down by AB5. This law.
Yes. That law is unconstitutional, unnecessary, and deliberately harsh.
So let's. I've never. I mean, we've talked around it before with guests I've had on, but I've never had one on who straight up said it's unconstitutional. Can we talk about that a little bit?
You bet. Absolutely. The choice of who you work for is an extremely personal and uh, important one. It basically is how you're going to support yourself. The founders of this country never imagined that someone, Party A, would try to keep Party B from living the way they want to live as far as work goes. There was an agrarian subsistence farming world in the 1760s and 70s, and everybody worked for themselves. That it was unimaginable that you not work for yourself.
Right.
So what's happened is that we have the Constitution. What's happened is that in 1938, the Roosevelt administration threatened to pack the Supreme Court and do things his way. And they submitted the Fair Labor Standards Act to Congress. And the when it came to go to court, people went to court and said the Fair Labor Standards Act is not the Fair Labor Standards Act. It basically sets up a union cartel. Nothing against unions. I was born in a two-union household. Uh, when you separate out, decide what the prices are going to be, decide who can participate, you've got an unconstitutional provision. But the Supreme Court was afraid of getting packed, so they passed it. And it's for 84 years, it's been the law of the land. But that doesn't mean it's in any way legitimate to tell someone who you're going to sell your services to, especially now that it's less of a manufacturing economy and it's predominantly a service economy. Service is speaking. You,
Right.
you you can't get instructions. You can't provide instructions. You can't give advice or do an artistic performance. It's all speech. I mean, even woodworking, wood has a language. So, but getting right back to practicality, there is an ABC test in the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was made stronger in Massachusetts, and in 2004, it was made stronger yet on Marty Walsh's watch when he was a co-chair of a government committee, legislative committee, making an adjustment to the law. And in a midnight deal, somebody put the wrong version of the bill under Governor Romney's signature, and he signed it without his staff looking at it. And California copied that legislation 15 years later. That was 2004, 2019. Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez said, "Oh, there's our piece." The unions knew what to tell her. And she put that in, and even made it worse because she said it didn't apply to individuals; it applied to persons, which means that it looked right through the corporation and corporate protection and went right back to the individual. So they've got the worst of all possible worlds. The unions said we're on a roll, and they put it into the PRO Act, and now we're taking this law with no legitimacy in its background. Yes, it's law, but it's not legitimate. And we're making it the law of the land and threatening to make it worse. So we threaten all 60 million self-employed, which includes all of your rideshare people and all of the gig economy people. They're all going to be in the same boat, which is, you're all going to be employees of great big corporations, and the unions are going to, mediate for you on your behalf, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. In fact, you sent me a stat for the rideshare, you must have looked this up, but you said, out of the, first of all, people, 60 million, let's remember that 60 million people in this country are independent contractors, freelancers, self-employed, whatever way you want to talk about it. But you sent me a stat of including the 600,000 who do passenger car driving. I think that that's just low because of the pandemic, because that's usually much higher.
I would agree. I would agree completely.
I'll give you a specific example. We know for certain, because I work with a company called Para, where we do transparency on DoorDash.
Yep.
And so DoorDash alone has 1.4 million US active dashers.
Oh, fantastic. Didn't know that. Thank you.
So, I mean, that stat alone would tell me that there's got to be around 2.5 million rideshare drivers.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that's, I don't know where this is. It must just be coming from a pandemic's point with that number, 600,000, because
that's a Bureau of Labor Statistics, probably a 2019 number.
Okay. Well, wow, that wouldn't be pandemic then, huh?
No, 600,000. The pandemic encouraged a lot of this. People had to get other jobs because they couldn't go to work.
Right, but the day the CARES Act passed, rideshare just went. Nobody was on it because they couldn't figure out how they. I mean, it took them a month to move to. Okay, we'll kind of go and let people. You won't be able to sit up front, and we'll try and find these partitions in case people sneeze. Things that weren't going to help anyway.
Yes.
So it's like.
Right.
It's just like all these dumb ideas were coming out, but it was like, if you're not 100% familiar with this, like I'll tell you this, before the pandemic happened in the CARES Act, I knew friends who were doing delivery platforms like Uber Eats and they couldn't make half of a minimum wage per hour doing those alone. I mean, there was no business. There was never good pay, and rideshare still had taken its beating, but there was still money to be made. The day the CARES Act happened, that flip-flopped in 1 second. It went from rideshare was the better to rideshare had zero business, so it's not even in the game. And the food delivery platforms skyrocketed because everybody needed food delivered.
Yes.
Immediately. So these people became like first responders. And in fact, the first couple months of the pandemic, people were getting $100 cash tips to deliver McDonald's. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
but it still hasn't rebalanced in my take on it. It still hasn't, like, I think that we'll see delivery go down some and the rideshare come back up. But regardless, I mean, if we have 1.4 million dashers actively, now I know a lot of them only work 10, 15 hours a week. However, there's still 1.4 million people in this country dashing.
Right.
And
Why should, whether they work full-time or part-time or sometimes, or even one time, why should any of that matter to anybody but them and the people they work with?
exactly. I'm just trying to give a stat of how many people are really out there doing this. So first of all, 60 million self-employed and all that, but I think we're in the multi-millions for even gig app workers.
I wouldn't even take one breath to disagree with that.
Yeah.
Everything about this it always turns out bigger.
So, when I've had previous guests on, I've talked to them about, like, why, and I won't get too far into this part of it because I've talked about it before, but why did I feel like I have to ask you this. Why do you feel that California initially, because it was initially, I remember Newsom and Lorena Gonzalez, as you were speaking about, talking about this, even Californians didn't know this was going to become a law. Most of them were like, what's AB5? Even after they passed it, but it wasn't January 2020 yet. It wasn't in effect, but they didn't know about what it really was or what's going on. What is your take on the fact that initially this was supposed to come after the gig economy, the gig app platforms, and then they end up, I mean, paying for it other than other people that got carve outs like anesthesiologists, doctors, dentists, all that kind of stuff. But they got their carve outs, but the gig economy didn't. So it fought with Prop 22, spent all this money. California spent money fighting it. And then in the end, I know that it's up in the air right now on its exact status, but in the end, they were carved out. And yet a whole net was cast on all these others who should have never even been in the net.
Right. These things, the events came in waves, reactions to reactions, and if you break it apart, it's a little easier. I'm 3,000 miles away, and I literally don't know, have never met in person any of the people that I've been working with for 2.5 years,
Yeah.
literally on an hour-by-hour basis. There was considerable debate outside California on what this law was going to do. And at the end of August in 2019, with the law not on the books, the Wall Street Journal came up with an angry, frustrated editorial, quite long on its editorial page, and said, "This is a disaster in the making." And I have a copy. I can get it to you. I looked at that and I said, I'm from Massachusetts. We've seen the law. We've seen what the state had to do to protect people as an unfortunate result. And this is an invitation to me to write about the Massachusetts experience with the ABC test. So I wrote a letter to the Journal. I had, never had one published before. I thought, you got to do it, and they printed it 2 weeks later. And it was the only reply to this long editorial. That all our opponents on the other side also wrote, but this is the one they printed. And I said, basically, this law damages everyone it touches, and that is not limited to self-employed or their buyers. Lorena Gonzalez is no longer in the legislature. There's a little train of activities that have befallen people who associate with this bill and push it. Gail Gordon, the people and have interviewed, every one of those people has been hurt, many of them catastrophically and irreparably. You can't put some of these things back together because they're pools of talent. So the warning was out there. Then the legislature passed it and I think it was October. It went into a law. It went into effect, and wham! All of a sudden, the employment attorneys started telling people, you don't want to have any independent contractors on your pay books, no matter how you pay them. Get rid of them. Yep. So out started the pink slip. Sorry, we're no longer working with you. They work, their counsel had other workarounds, but it didn't involve the people that AB5 hit. Then in reaction, smart guys with good market cap and plenty of investor capital like Uber and the others said this thing is gonna kill us one way or another. So that was a separate they put Prop 22 out there, and everybody got on board, one side or the other, and it was, I think, 59-41 something. They voted, the public as customers voted to have Rideshare and DoorDash. They've been through the pandemic. They were going through it in 2020. And so they said, no way. They didn't believe anything except they wanted their Uber. I mean, even Mothers Against Drunk Driving said this really having a rideshare suppresses drunk driving deaths, because you can have fine time at a bar, call Uber, and find your way home safely without driving a car to do it. So then people took the other side took Prop 22 to court, and I've lost it in the weeds at that point. I'm not sure what's happened.
Well, I think it's still in a constitutional challenge.
Right. I know
because
go ahead.
I can't really remember what exactly it was. To me, I was blown away, and I've asked several times to the ladies that you're speaking of and that we're talking about. I've asked them how on earth did so many California attorneys, not to mention the attorneys that, the hundreds of thousands that Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and Instacart and all these platforms have, how did they all overlook the fact that, oops, this violates the Constitution?
It's very expensive to tell your client, if you're an attorney, well, you're going to have to fight for your rights by going to court. So I'm not sure they actually look to see if it's constitutional or not. Maybe some people did, but they said you've got to basically obey it. A constitutional challenge is hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so what dry cleaners or even a dry cleaning association is going to not, they're going to say, well, we'll challenge the Constitution. I mean,
well, but Uber and Lyft spent Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and DoorDash spent $208 million to fight for Prop 22.
Right. But
so obviously they can throw, even though they don't make any money, never have for 12, 13 years.
It's investor money. Right.
Right. But nonetheless, they were able to raise that money and say, hey, we are going to fight this.
Right.
And then it passed, and they said, okay, we'll give you that vote. It passed. And then it's still being challenged. Well, it's almost like that sore loser effect. And I know there's more to it, but that's how I take it. It's like, okay, we'll get it on the November ballot and we'll all see how everybody feels. Well, it passed by 3 million votes. So
yes.
It clearly passed even to people not affected by it, who were like, no, you're not.
Right.
This is clearly is taking away people's rights.
No, I don't. That was not a constitutional challenge. Your chances, the money, you have to look at the money that it costs versus your likelihood of outcome.
Right.
Your likelihood of outcome of going all the way through the appellate courts and getting to a Supreme Court and winning are very slim. Lots of lawsuits, very few victories.
Sure.
So you wouldn't spend $200 million on that. If you're going to spend $200 million, go straight to the public and get an up or down vote. You can monitor the whole thing by polls. You can adjust on an hourly basis what you say, and you have a much better chance of winning. But you have to go at it with money. So it's like the ASJA, you're familiar with the American Society of Journalists and Authors. They've challenged on First Amendment grounds, which I think is a wonderful lawsuit. And I think could be the answer to most people's prayer is here's a short circuit. I have no idea. Much of this is done pro bono by the nonprofits that focus on litigation. Bless them, they doing a fantastic job. The good news for freelancers is if this is discussed by the Supreme Court in its chambers and nobody squeals, somebody's going to say, well, these guys have a black letter law case that they're being restricted, so this is going to pass. And then some guy 2 robes down will say, how are you going to limit it to the authors when the videographers tell stories and comedians on stage tell stories and the opera singers tell stories? Now, how do you limit? And the answer is you can't. And in that answer in the Supreme Court comes a lot of power that beats all the political campaigning and the running for office and the props 22 wherever they are. It beats all that, because the Supreme Court one day, Steve, the Supreme Court's going to say this whole thing is unconstitutional because being in a service business is a function of language and speech.
Yes. And honestly, I told a lot of people this last year, because of my conversations with so many people out in California and Kim and stuff, that people weren't really that aware how close Prop 22 or the PRO Act on the national level really was.
Yes.
I mean, again, it was like AB5, but it was on the national scale. I was telling people, and they're like, "I don't know what the PRO Act is." I'm like, it's about to ruin everybody's lives. So,
Yes, right.
I mean,
Right.
I mean, it was shocking. It's always shocking to me, like, first of all, when these type of like such blanket coverage ideas that are just going to be done so quickly without investigation, testing, all this kind of stuff happen. But I was like, how do people not know about this?
Americans are not used culturally. They're not familiar with having to watch every single thing their governments do. And they are learning it to their unhappiness this year, last year, the year before, that you can't trust these guys any outside your site. Even when they're in your site, you can't trust them, because look at the damage that they're doing. I lament privately.
Which, by the way, not to interrupt you, but by the way, this is not a political show or a political statement. This is we're just simply talking about the rights of independent contractors and some things that have happened that are
right
happening behind closed doors to take away all of your rights in this respect.
I couldn't agree more. I work with both parties. They're each different to work with. We all have the same interests. Every freelancer, every self-employed person, every gig worker has the same business model. We are all uniform. It's the number of hours you work and how much you can get per hour. And everything becomes more detailed there. So we all understand each other. We all understand how to do it, and we accept the risk. The Congress momentarily has a fever for government control and more authoritarian forms of legislation, and it's indulging itself because there is no adult to say, nope, this is going to hurt us. Everybody, they go behind closed doors, they put a 5,000-page bill through, and they go, here we go, we got paid to do that. But that's going to change. And it's going to change one way or another. And I'm happy to be part of this. I'm a tiny little, speck, but you do your thing.
I try and do the same, and I just don't overload my channel. I try and make sure my channel has a bunch of different content, but I always try and bring this in once in a while so that people get reminded. We do have a comment here. There's been a few, but there's this one I think is worth putting up. This is a person I know. I don't think that's
yeah, there's quite a bit of luggage right in that. Yeah, we live in a command economy. That's not what we want to live in. And a lot of 2022, 2023, 2024 is going to be about people expressing that. They don't want people pushing them around. They're Americans. And you don't need anything more granular than that to get a feel for it. So,
and I'll say this, Bud Soda, I saw that you missed the start of this before that comment. Mike started off by saying he's not against. So unlike a lot of my guests, he's not against the unions, but I think I didn't ask you if it's somewhat along the way I view it. There's a time and a place for unions, and it's only in specific. I grew up in Michigan, so I had a lot of my family was in auto, and a lot of them were in the auto unions. That was different. This is a different time, a different world. everything's done online. I mean, these Instacart strikes that do nothing. 1,000 people
Right.
don't go on a platform that has 1.2 million per day, and they, I just it just drives me nuts. I think that um I'm glad that you're on the side of that, because we've talked about, like police, fire. The teachers union is corrupt, but it's needed, or it's been needed many times through time. There are unions that are needed, but not everywhere. And I think that, we'll go down your points here too, but I think that you would even mention something about that. But we'll get to it, I guess, as we go. But so I asked you what the best topics for you, because a lot of the people in here right now, and a lot of my viewers and listeners are on the East Coast, and I usually do things with people regarding AB5 in California. But moving beyond that, you said the most important thing that you've been working on is new jobs. Be my own boss.
That's correct.
The
I will later. I will come back to your point about your union background in Michigan. Mine is in Cleveland, and I want to support what you said about not having no axe to grind against unions as in general.
Okay.
The most important thing we're working on right now is federal legislation, which we have called "Be My Own Boss," which is the phrase eventually that everyone who goes out on their own says, like, I am just not going to do this. I don't mind a customer, or a patient, or a client, or whatever, but I'm just not going to have a boss. And they say, I want to be my own boss, and they know that. So they pick up on this. We're trying to fix a problem, again, that began with the Fair Labor Standards Act, when the government said, we, the government, and our designated people that support us, will decide what your classification is as far as being self-employed or an employee. And they took it upon themselves to declare a one-way choice. You can see it in Massachusetts legislation and in California. It says all service workers, in my words, are assumed to be employees unless, and then they get, so there's that hard unless. You have to fight your way out of something that is your choice. Can you imagine what marriage and divorce would look like if we had the same, all persons are what? Declared married, declared single, unless you prove what? And it's just nuts.
It'd be like, what, common law marriage after a day or something.
Yeah, and then subject to some panel, in your capital city as to whether you're married or not. Now, forget it. They will never guess. The person who knows their wishes and who ought to be able to express it is the individual. That's who does the classification. So when we wrote it, we said, what do people need? And the first thing is they need a toggle. They need a switch where they can go, I am self-employed. Now, I may not be self-employed exclusively, because I may work for the man during the days, and then at night, weekends, whatever, I want to be a marketing ace or a designer or drive or whatever. So somebody has to make the choice. And there is in this country, with education and knowledge and our incredible networking, individuals should make that choice. And so we put up a toggle, said, I am willing to take the rights and responsibilities of self-employment. Bingo. You make your choice. You can do other things. We can talk about those, but you have the choice to work as self-employed. Second thing, how does anyone know? And they need a token that they can give their customers, their patients, their clients, whatever. And that is a date that they got. They filed this application for self-employment number from the U.S. government. And we chose, probably, may not wisely, but we chose the Department of Labor, because the Fair Labor Standards Act makes all the decisions about that as is the foremost legislation. So we said, you have to get out of the coverage by the Fair Labor Standards Act in order to make this change. Any lawyer who's studied it, employment law, will tell you, if you don't change the Fair Labor Standards Act, you still got it. It's still there untouched. So that was the first thing we did, is make a proposal to the definitions language, and to the exemption language. The way it worked is that every single freelancer is both an employer and an employee. So the employer part can't be subjected to the Fair Labor Standards Act because it's about employees. So you have to take those out with the definition. It's very simple. It's short. You just say it doesn't include people who've signed up to be self-employed.
Yep.
Then you take that remaining half of the person that is an employee, hopefully of themselves, and you say they're exempted, because how can the government tell you what your left pocket pays your right pocket? I mean, that's nuts.
Right.
So you're not going to get into speciousness. So they're out of coverage. And then the question is, what benefits do they get? And the example is, there are, for instance, 28 different laws that define employer, employee. You have to get out from underneath those. That's voluminous. Nobody wants to look at it. But you get a token, you get a toggle, and you get the name, be my own boss. Yes, that's what I want. So
Yeah.
that's what we've provided.
When you're talking about the 28 different laws, are you talking about the right to work states?
No, I'm talking about all the different, like the coal miners. I've got a list here someplace. They're ERISA, Social Security, Black Lung, wage and benefit, wage and hours. The DOL has other definitions of its own. These are actual laws. There are 28 of them, as I said, that refer to employer, employee.
So I guess while we're there too, like, I know that in the mix was the Dynamex decision out in California pre-AB5, but why? I feel like I'm going to say the wrong one. Was it the Barella? Is it the Barella that was in place before ABC, or was it the other IRS standard test there was one around before one?
Barella, yes, you can get lost in this, but Barella was the law of California for many years and apparently wasn't much of a problem. California has an enormous independent, self-employed.
Yes.
I mean, when you look at the like defense industry, entertainment industry, music, software. I mean, these are enormous industries built entirely on project work, as they should. That's how you do these things. I mean,
right, like I did a thing on interpreters specifically. Interpreters are trained to be interpreters, and none of them are employees anywhere. Almost
right,
like 2%.
But that's fine, because they learn how to make a living, and they're not dependent on anyone else.
And they pay their taxes, and they
overpay their taxes.
Yep.
Yeah, make it clear. We got to make that clear that every self-employed individual eventually hears from his or her accountant, look, don't chisel on your taxes. It loses you time. If you get an audit, you're going to spend a ton of time doing something you shouldn't even be doing. Just pay the taxes. It's way cheaper than the penalty of trying to defend yourself from doing something you did.
Yeah.
The accusation. Anyway, what happened was the Dynamex decision is a put-up job. Transient employees applied to Dynamex, got hired, came up with a grievance, went to the labor regulation or did whatever they did, and then soon after it got into the system, they disappeared off the job. That's the behavior that SALTs express. They had no previous connection. They worked for a short amount of time. They did something that was turned into something much bigger and vanished. Right. And I don't know whether it just smells of a union SALT. They were put there for a reason. And then Lorena Gonzalez followed up and said, well, the judiciary said that the legislature has to write a bill, so we have to conform to it, which is absolutely a baseless statement. Let's put it that way. The legislature doesn't have to do anything. The courts tell it to.
I have I mean, it took me a minute to even understand why Lorena Gonzalez was in the seat she was in,
Yeah.
because clearly she was she did not understand this was the union's targeting her, almost like, let's use Lorena as our vessel.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I honestly believe she knew nothing, almost, like, not nothing, but she really, this wasn't like her lifeblood. She was bleeding this to make this happen. I think they came to her. She saw a chance to rise up. I know she wanted that AG position in California, but that was unrealistic.
She was a Teamster before she was a Teamster attorney before, I mean,
Yeah. But I mean, they literally just picked her out of the crop and said, "Hey, we'll move you up the ladder," kind of thing. That's how I view it. Is like, this was all just for her self benefit. It wasn't like she was the expert on the.
right. The law is terribly written. Every, you look online at employment counsel, they're nonpartisan. They're all parties. They look at this and they'll tell you how bad this comment. I got it. They'll tell you how badly written this law is, and it's just a mess as legislation. So that to me is sloppy draftsmanship that should never happen. There's no excuse for it, even from the other side,
Yeah.
or from our side. No, anyway, no perspective, not sides.
Yeah. So the be my own boss legislation, is that your main undertaking right now? Is that like that's your focus? I mean, I
That's
know we're going to go through the other things. I know you're focused on a few things, but
that's an important tool with which to organize freelancers and the supportive legislators. Is it gives you something to be for. Whether you can't eternally fight bad ideas. Massachusetts is a good example of that. You can't fight the liberal ideas that come out and always be saying no, because everyone will say, why don't you compromise? Well, you can't compromise some things. There isn't any compromise with being self-employed. You either are or you're dependent, period, full stop.
Exactly.
So it's important, but it's a badge. It's a ticket to talk about. Like, I want to talk with you about where this is going. And people want to know that because nobody else is proposing anything. You can look that up. So we have this. You can go to Congress with it, and we have that. So we're getting them involved. You can go to, and there are two houses in Congress, and they go different directions, different players, and different dynamics. We have probably 20 offices in the House that would be very supportive if someone goes first, but they're all busy, got to get reelected, so nobody wants to go first, but they'd all be co-supporters. So we're still looking for a supporter. Nobody's turned us down. And we have one interested office in the Senate, very interested for a very appropriate senator who gets it. So it's important. But at the moment, along with that, you have to play defense, or something like this House Rule 7701 is just terrible, because it dramatically increases the penalties on business that hires freelancers or works with franchises. And we're talking from 1,000 up to over 100,000 plus treble damages in a cascade of destruction.
And I was going to add to that, like, I mean, California is like the biggest watch state when something happens in the country. And I mean, did we not learn that? I've put this question out there before. Did AB5 create any jobs? And literally all of my panels have said none that I know of, and they are trying to find one for me.
No,
They're like,
you can't. It's AB5 is a backward looking effort. It wants to go back to a simpler day. We have project management as an industry, and everything is set in self-employment, freelancing, gig economy, rideshare. Everything is work divided into projects.
yes.
And you can say, I don't know what a project is. Well, it's a thing you do for someone else. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's easily definable. And when it's over, everybody agrees, and you get a hurrah or a, a shit, and that's, excuse my language, and that's the end of the project. You can either get better next time or stop doing them if you don't like them.
Yeah.
So that whole thing, the unions are, who are the the proponents here of this, are just ignoring the management and efficiency and enjoyment advantages of project work. They're just saying, no, we're not going to do that. That's like shooting your foot. Like, okay, doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
Um, the they're ignoring that how many people, especially the ones that continually attract my attention, are moms who cannot have two bosses. They're raising one boss, and how can you take you got sniffle driven schedules. You can't,
Yes.
school's closed. You got to, someone's going to take care of your kid. You can't leave him out on the curb and go into work and hope to find him on the way back. It doesn't work that way. And moms know that, but people aren't thinking about that. The disabled, I spend a lot of time thinking about talking with the disabled. Autism hits millions of people, and freelancing, independent contracting, is an ideal way to accommodate yourself and find people who understand that some days you may be having a meltdown and you'll be fine in 2 days. Okay, I can work that way.
I have a little scenario on that one that we just had a guest on last week, Ellen, who is in Henderson, Nevada, and she has 2 kids. She raises them alone. One of them is autistic and 17, and I don't want to put this the incorrect way, but he's on the farther end of the spectrum too. So she was a W-2 teacher, and they've all known about this for years, about her son, and she did gig work on the weekends and on the side to earn that extra income on the gig apps. She recently was, even with all the lack of employees right now, she was recently let go because they said there's just too many calls about your autistic son at the other school and you're having to leave. And so they let her go because he was getting calls saying he has to go today. You have to come get him.
Right.
During the pandemic, they were just loving everything she did. Thank you for coming in. Thank you. Thank you. And then now it's kind of like, as we exit the pandemic, they're like, you can't be doing that. You're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is a form of cruelty in public policy that is just, it defies description. It defies belief that people are willing to do this to other human beings and just sit quietly by and go, yep, sure. That's going to be our national policy. It's like, oh, please.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah, I'm with you on that.
So the one of the other things you were talking about, fighting the current efforts by this administration. Again, this isn't political, guys. We're just talking. I mean, obviously, when you say administration, we think political, but we're just talking about the rights of independent contractors, where they lie, all that kind of thing. But so the current efforts of by this administration end freelancing and self-employment. Is that something that you want to expand on a little bit there?
Yes. So I mentioned House Rule 7701. Anybody who wants to gag should take a read. There are 2 other factors at work right now that we're working on. And again, this is the littlest little guy trying to win against the biggest big guy. So this is like a little boy David against an army of Goliaths. And the question is, you got to choose your strategy, right? And hit on the first blow. But there's a woman named Jennifer Abruzzo, who is the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. Now, the National Labor Relations Board is set up to govern, use that term, the relationship in unionized relations. In other words, a factory or a plant or a trade that has a organized labor union mediating between the employer and the employee. Jennifer's idea, she's very bright. She's worked a lot of time at the NLRB, so she's a lifer, except when she works for a union, the Communications Workers of America. Her idea is that this is a fine organization to manage, direct, and control all employer-employee relations, which has no basis either in the Constitution or in law. She is made up an idea that she's going to manage all this because she believes that her way is best. Now, it's unbelievable, but that's where she's headed. So there's a woman who's very she just can't see the damage that she's doing or cares nothing at all about it. So you have to figure out, how can you make this visible to a lot of people in a short period of time? So just don't let them operate in the dark the way California legislature operated in the dark with AB 5. That bears a great deal of strategic thought. It's just hard to do this. Getting the 60 million freelancers involved helps a lot.
Yeah.
The other is something that that fits very much with what Abruzzo is doing. I'll call her General Counsel Abruzzo to use her professional title. There was a man named David Weil. I don't think we've mentioned his name. He was the head of Wage and Hour Division for President Obama, and he went back to the universities for the intervening administration. And his thought he wrote a book in 2015 called The Fissured Workplace. Yes. And if he were to write the correct book, I would call it The Fractal WorkNet, because those words would accurately describe what you and I are working with. But he has basically plans to threaten all of the big brand name companies with a well-organized attack squad of regulators from all the different agencies that affect large corporations, the SEC, the Employment, Retirement and Investment Security, EEOC, OSHA, DOL, and he's going to put all of them together and attack these large corporations to make them accept unionization. Look at what's happening with Starbucks and Amazon. Mm-hmm. Accept unionization, accept prevailing wage, make sure that never work with another freelancer again, never defranchise your operations and make all of your franchisees employees. And we're going to threaten them with absolute destruction of their stock value and the personal reputations of the people in the company or the people who deal with it. And it's in print. You can buy the book and see it, and it's horrifying. He did not make it into office, but he knows all the people, and they're all buddies with him, so they're going to follow his template. So I call it the Weil Doctrine. The doctrine is one of the words that the military uses when they describe how we're going to fight a battle. He's got his Weil Doctrine for how to beat the companies and unionize all of them and get rid of franchising and freelancing and self-employment forever. It's not a pretty prospect. So it does get the attention of people like me.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting you bring that up, that Fisher, because that's one thing that Kim hit on pretty hard in our very first interview, just Kim and I. I think that's even how we started. I introduced her, and then within 2 minutes, she was already into that. That was like the big thing with her right then. She was like, listen, you all need to know what this is.
Yeah.
You need to understand what, and so she kind of walked the bridge that way. And I think there was a lot to that. Like, at first I was kind of like, well, how is this? I don't know. I'm always like, I'm just stunned. Like when you say that somebody, like maybe they don't understand the damage they're doing, or I find that hard to believe in those positions. Like you have to be, at least on some level, you have to understand what you're doing. You can't be so brainwashed that you're like, no, this is good for everybody to be unemployed.
Steve, I struggle with that same dichotomy myself. I can't understand how a simple sentient human being can ignore the widely broadcast pain that these laws have and will continue to make even more severe on people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. They've tried to live their best lives. Let me tell you, the people who bring up autistic children are saints in the making. Those people have developed infinite patience and affection, and to just do anything that gets in their way of their independent relationship, the government has no right to get involved in that anywhere. As we've said, no constitutional right, no legal right, no moral right. It doesn't make any sense. I guess they don't care. That's the
Right.
only
That's all I can ever think of too.
right.
Or some groups giving them a ton of money,
Right.
and they're choosing to say, I don't believe in it. I don't think this is true. This is, you guys are making something out of nothing kind of thing. And it's like, how
Right.
can we be making something out of nothing when the proof is already there in California? This did not work.
Well, the only I find like you that it winds up being sort of an emotional energy dead end to try to explain their behavior. I mean, why is Putin attacking Ukraine? I mean, it's like, what are you going to get? Like, why? Um, so I just looking forward. The thing that we all together have is 60 million people, and it is an
Mhm.
enormous number. If you don't like,
That's just so people know, that's about a third of the working.
yes,
It's about a third of the working population.
it's also more than 100,000 per congressional district. And that is more than the margin of victory in almost all races. So if we were congressional races, if we were to energize even a fraction of that for these people to get to be, make themselves heard, we will change it. We stopped the PRO Act. Yes, we had help from the franchisees, but we stopped the PRO Act. Trumpka promised it in March of 2021. It's not in law yet. It's not going to be in law. We made that wire too hot to handle. And
Yeah.
we can do this with this wild doctrine and Abruzzo and her excursions. They're running out of time and they know it. And there's panic on the other side. That's why they're doing this and slamming this stuff together. You asked about big bills. It's the fastest way they can get their chips on the table in a hurry. It's like put everything into a bill, get it to the ed and labor, and they'll stuff it through, and Pelosi gets them to vote for it, and so that's the House. All of a sudden, this huge thing comes through the House, and then everybody goes, "Yes, Senate, okay, over to you," and not so much. But
So I got to ask you this while we're there. So, I mean, ProAct was really being pushed even beginning of this year. And that's when I was telling some people, like, man, you don't know how close this was at
yep.
the end of last year, coming into this year. I mean, really almost happened kind of thing. And do you think people are fighting for that hard now before the November elections, or do you think they're backing off going, listen, we can't keep sticking our neck out on this right now. We're already losing seats left and right. We can't keep fighting for this dumb law to have every 60 million Americans be unemployed.
Are you speaking as a House, for instance?
Anybody that might be up for re-election this November, which is a lot,
I think. What do I think? I believe that most of the Democratic caucus understands that they're up against some very, very hard electoral times. Now, there are those with famous names. Pelosi's going to get reelected. I mean, they're not going to turn her out in San Francisco. I know. I have a close friend who's a Pelosi voter. I mean, that's going down.
Just FYI, though, that's amazing to me that she would get reelected, by the way.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I would think that, I don't care who you are, I would think you've seen through it by now.
I personally think that she might win, announce her resignation, and gift an open seat for appointment to Governor Newsom, who in either his waning days or just before his next term will fill it with someone just like Nancy Pelosi. So
right.
I think they know they're on hard times. I think some of them have been, have been assuaged with money that is flowing right now to these campaigns. All of that can be looked up. I think there's going to be a lot of promises. I think people are kind of hoping. I think a lot of them know they're sacrificial lambs, and um, this is their they've got to be polite and take their loss, because they had a nice run in Congress. They got a tiny pension and go back to the private sector.
Yeah. Um, so the third thing that you had was new jobs continue working to energize the self-employed and freelancers. Freelancers have been engaged uh, since Cal AB5 was passed in 2019 and went into effect in January of 2020. Um, the unions are hoping to wait us out. Where's all this going? Because at this point, I feel like, I mean, even gig employees who do it full time on the platforms, delivering food, rideshare, off-brand stuff like Shipt or Curry or any of these last mile services, even they have an understanding if they live in California now. I know people who love Prop 22 because they don't understand it and they're just benefiting from it for a minute, kind of thing. But I know a lot of gig workers who didn't know anything about it who hate Prop 22, even though it could benefit them. They're like, we know what this is doing. I mean, we understand that this is, I mean, like I mean, you gotta, I mean, if these companies can't make money and if you're having to pay every active hour to gig employee platform people 120% of minimum wage on the base pay, not including tips, I mean, they're just going to be active on the apps and do deliveries slowly. You most likely can't do more than 2 in an hour. And let's take San Francisco. The minimum wage in San Francisco is like $19.86 or something. But let's take San Francisco. So you have to be paying 120%. That's 20, we'll call it $24. Well, DoorDash has a base price of $3 an order. You can only do two an hour on an active hour. So $6 is what DoorDash is going to pay you. But in San Francisco, they're going to owe you another Prop 22, $18. And people are collecting this on the delivery side, on the rideshare side, which is what it should have helped, if anything. Nobody's getting Prop 22 money because an active hour is going to make you at 24 or over.
If the two thoughts at the same time. It may be that for the delivery and rideshare platforms, real employees are an intermediate step to robo driving.
Right.
And it may be that it's gotten held up. That Phoenix accident was just nuts. It's a horrible tragedy for the individual and a major setback for these, the investor plan, the investors plan for what I think they're going to
I
drop.
follow autonomous very deeply. I report on it all the time. The realistic line of autonomous is so far out that it's
Right.
I mean, I've talked to I have an interview coming up with one of the engineers at Bolt Autonomous Engineering, and
Nice.
he said I said realistically, when is a car going to drive to my house without a driver, pull up, I go get in it, throw my luggage in the back, takes me to the airport, and then knows how to get to the next driver, to the next passenger. Because I've already seen too many flaws, and I know that the LiDAR doesn't work in snow, and there's all these issues, and yet they're on the road. But he was like, well, he's like, I don't even know if you'd see full by 2050, 2060.
Right. No, I think
most people in articles you see next year full autonomous. I mean, we saw an ad from the Ioniq 5 saying that they are full autonomous starting in 2023, and I started thinking back years to like the time when false advertising was a thing that people prosecuted for.
yes.
Before the internet, false advertising was real.
I think when many of the big money investors got into the platform companies, I think the prospects looked much more rosy, and I think they could handle. You put in 20 million. You're a pension fund in a medium-sized state. You can afford to wait. It's Uber. They've got tons. I think people are much more sober now. That's why valuations are changing. I I don't know if 600,000, 2 million, pick a number. If 2 million people can't do rideshare, they'll do something else. Uh, Even if rideshare is not prohibited and it is prohibited and the others aren't by economics, they'll do something different. They'll paint fences or whatever. I mean, people are very creative.
Yeah.
So, but if there's no self-employment option, the world becomes a much darker place for anyone in a rural area, anyone with a compromised schedule or a compromised ability to deliver work every day is going to be at great risk. These people created 60 million jobs, you
Right.
know,
Or the need for flexibility.
right?
That's huge.
How
That's
do you,
huge amongst gig workers.
I mean, and you're a boss, and you think, if I'm a boss, like I was a boss for 20 years, like I gotta get work. I make a promise to deliver work. So how many people do I have to hire to do the job of 3 people?
Right.
If I don't know they're going to be there, like I have to. What do I have to hire 6? What if they all show up? Where's the money going to come for that? I mean, these are unanswerable questions.
Right.
So I think the other side says that employers are oblivious, they're careless, and no, they're working. Employers are working a very complicated uh, mathematical algorithm of how they get something done and what are their chances of actually doing what they project. So it's a bright new day if you permit self-employment. Everything works great for everybody, but the unions would be left out of the membership fees and the pensions to wallow in.
So that's where I wanted to jump back on that third point a little bit, because on your third point, and as I had asked you, like, do you think that this summer something will happen before the election? Because I feel like they've just stuck their neck out too far and been hung on this so many times. But you had put in our conversation that the unions are hoping to wait us out and change the laws against us this summer before the election while we're not looking, which is how AB5 happened. To those that don't know, I was like, nobody was looking. There it was. What's AB5? It's your new law. Live with it, But I mean, do you see this? Do you see this happening? Do you see the unions
when I
like
read, when
doing anything this summer that's going to be notable?
well, I got a copy here of 7701, and got up close and personal with it, and I said, well, this is a major part of the enforcement platform is right here. These enormous. What they're trying to do is poison the buyer pool and give them shock treatment, like 100,000, and get them to back away. If the buyer backs away, and they proved this in Massachusetts, you can reduce the amount of independent contracting. Massachusetts has a lower than average rate of entrepreneurship. Crazy. This is the best educated state in the country, and we have much below some states that you wouldn't characterize. I don't want to no slurs, but you wouldn't characterize as being highly entrepreneurial driven. And so there's got to be a suppression mechanism, and not having buyers for independent contracting is certainly in a state like Massachusetts as good as it gets as a reason. So
But
yes, I expect this is part of the summer surprise 7701. There may be others.
you don't think that this just? I mean, first of all, let's be honest. The unions have been dying for years. I mean, union membership dues. I mean, all this. It's a downward trend. So obviously, they're looking for these ways to come back. Do you think anybody's in like looking for pre-November election stuff? They're looking for, oh, you're with the unions? Sweet. Or do you think they're like, wait a minute, you're with the unions? I was actually thinking about listening to you. Now I don't want to.
Are you talking about legislators and how
Voters and how it's being produced, the whole thing. I mean, like how it's coming across to people. Because I know that you and I were talking about there's the time and place for a union. Yes. Not in a lot of these spaces, but I mean, how most people you say union, they're just like, no, 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 no. And it's almost like you don't even need to go any farther.
It's an interesting point. The unions might adapt. If I were we talked much earlier about attitudes towards unions. If unions were competitive and they were not protected by a mandate to there can only be one, and they get the exclusive representation grant. It's like a franchise that the unions get. If they were free market, it's probably the next business I would set up would be an employees union. It's so great because you could work with the best employees, so everybody wants to be a good employee. You could work with your employer to see how can we take the people that we've got and make them even more productive and have them enjoy it more, and you make more money. And it would be, and there are so many ways to improve a business. And I've had one for, well, longer than I care to admit. And having a late workforce that's on your side, not against you, every single cup or drinking container or message from headquarters is a great opportunity. So if we had competitive unions, we'd have 3 times, 4 times as many unions as we have, all probably different than the unions that we do have now. So think about that. But so that there's opportunity out there. If you go after exclusive representation, there's another line of attack that the other side is vulnerable. They've got a grant, and there's no reason. Nobody in the country voted for that. It happened. So
Right.
60 million people, you can do a lot if you talk to them.
So actually, so that goes to let me just make sure that we talked about the First Amendment challenge. Okay, so this goes to okay. If you had, I always try and like kind of make coming out of these a little bit more of a tougher question, but not so tough that it's tough. I just like, if you had the attention of all 60 million independent contractors in this country, I would say everybody, but let's just say all 60 million independent contractors, and they were all watching a video and you had it for 2 to 3 minutes, what would you say in those 2 to 3 minutes?
I would say meet as many other independent contractors, freelancers, drivers as you possibly can, and with them get together and talk to your state and federal representatives and tell them you're coming to the ballot box and you want their full attention on your future. You want to be your own boss. Change that rule, everything will be fine.
Okay, so and that in that lies a little bit of an issue I deal with a lot with people's emails or questions or whatnot. Is it, I get a lot of, is it really worth it? How do I go down and do something? How do I get in touch with because we've had Kim on here saying you need to go get in touch with your legislation. You need to do this. But how do you make those people not feel so scared about doing that? Because some people, I think, feel like an army of one when they go in. But
Yes.
the way I view it is like when you go into one of these offices or you want to go talk to a congressman or whatever you're doing, they don't know how, they can't just look at you or whatever. They don't know what you represent.
Yes.
So they have to take you extremely seriously.
Right. I worked for the New York State Senate, and for 1 year, way back when. And the term is you get waltzed if you go in personally. Yes. Gosh, Steve, that's great. I know just what you mean. I'm going to back that all the way. Send me whatever you've got, and I'll back it. Thank you very much. Do you want to see the chamber? Bye. Okay, that's waltzing. That's a state legislature at its worst. There's a FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They don't actually read what you send, as anybody who's written something careful and they get thanked for the others saying they're on the other side. They weigh them. And if there are lots and lots of people on this one issue, they are going to handle it like the best china. They know what their margin was, and if they heard from 1,000 people, that would end it. You don't need to get all your friends, just some of them, in your neighborhood, whatever, in your occupation. The occupations are well organized, and you need to push your occupational representation group. It's the ophthalmic surgeons or the hairstylists of Buffalo, New York, or whatever. Pick a name, get them to work with you, and then just call the office, Google who represents Mike Hruby in Cleveland, Tennessee, and you'll get the state and the federal office holders. And call their office 24 hours a day. They record them and they tabulate them. I'm Mike Hruby, and I think we should have the right to be self-employed. And I just want you to know, phone number. Here's where I live. I'm in your district. Bingo.
Okay. But that's, still, I mean, a lot of people okay, outside of the emails, whatever, I don't know. I'm just, it almost I don't want to compare it to the unions, but I almost feel like, just like these protest chant type things aren't the win either.
No, I don't think they are. The last thing they want is to hear someone totally dead serious. So I've got 45 barbers, in East Albany, wherever they are, Albany, Georgia, and we're voting against anyone who votes for something or other. Say a fact, and then tell your people you're gonna live with it, make it happen. This many people with this much of a problem bends gravity, Steve, and we have to help people understand it. We're a geologic event. If 60 million people jump off a chair all at the same time, it'll register on the Richter scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do something more impressive than creating a very small earthquake, and make something happen. I hate to sound Pollyannish, but people pay attention to who they hear from.
And I mean, if people really pay attention, then pay attention to California. AB5 put, again, people who I know who were in business for themselves for 40 years, let's say, had earned six figures, had a nice life. I mean, like you said, they can't even bounce back from it. I'll use Lisa Rothstein for a minute. She said that, everybody put it in their own way, but I liked her way. She said that the day AB5 hit, I became so toxic to every client that I've worked with that they weren't even calling me. And when I would call them, they said, I know we've been working with you for 25 years, Lisa, and she's like, well, but you still can. And here's how they were like, listen, we don't really understand it. Right. And I understand what you're saying, but we just can't afford to take that chance.
That's the buyer suppression is a major backup tool to legislation. And if you show that you are not suppressed, that if in fact you are inflamed, you are a different substance than they were expecting to work with. We haven't reached our peak yet of clout. We need to. That's why we wrote the legislation. Here's what I'm for. Tell me you're going to vote for it. We got 60 people. We're going to watch for it. And if not, we're going to take every legitimate means we can to make sure you go back to some other occupation like we've had to do.
Yeah. But then again, in California, they cast the net. Everybody went out of business. Everybody's businesses are upside down. They're all just trying to figure anything out at this point. And still to this day, how many jobs were created by AB5? Zero, as far as I've been told by everybody.
We're one mansion, one Kelly, and one cinema away from having that already happen in the U.S.
Okay. So, I mean, I just, it scared the crap out of me when I saw the PRO Act getting as close as it did. And I started getting closer and closer to what the PRO Act truly was. And I know that you guys have a huge fight coming up on your hands in Massachusetts.
Tremendous money throwing contest.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd to me. It's like I think I saw that Lyft threw in money before the other companies this time in Massachusetts, and this time it's in prep though. It's not like the law is already done, right? It's
right.
More in prep to let's get a jump on the law, on what they're going to do.
Right, exactly.
So, but I mean, it's going to be the same type of thing. Let's go throw $200 million around Massachusetts. Who even knows where it's going?
Right.
It's.
Right. I mean, it's anyway. So I wish we were paying more attention to it, but what the individual has actually more opportunity to act nationally, crazy as it sounds, than in some of these blue states.
Yeah.
I've lived here for, God, a long time,
Yeah.
many administrations in Massachusetts. Anyway, uh, people
So
they can follow me on Twitter and get the latest
yeah,
latest
absolutely.
insight.
And I will include any links he gives me, but I'll absolutely put his Twitter account, because if you guys are on Twitter like I am, he's definitely an account to watch. He posts a lot of stuff, just like Kim, who I've recommended. Those are some posts to watch though. A lot of stuff on Twitter isn't really that newsworthy or whatever, but
We're at sign venture VENTURE Mike, the number one, and the at New Jobs America is another. One side gets the personal, one side gets the business. But
yeah, I mean, anything that you send me after we're done here, I'll put into the show notes too, and into
okay,
into the audio podcast notes as well, so that people can see it. So, before we shut it down here today, what's your last word of advice to? We've got 17 people watching right now. It's gone up to as high as 22 during this. So we probably had about 70, 80 people watch this throughout, for portions at least. So what is your last word? And then people will watch the replay and listen to the podcast. So what's your last word out there to the people who want to be independent contractors, or who are unsure about any of the, just whatever your last words are to the population?
I would say remember that independent contracting is completely legitimate. In the modern era, it was invented by Mozart and perfected by Beethoven. Mozart left the Prince Esterhazy or whatever his name was. He wanted to write his music, and he sensed a market for it. He sensed pretty well because a lot of people are still in love with Mozart. Beethoven said, "Oh, but that's not all you have to do. You have to get on with the new instrument, which was the piano. You have to write pieces. You have to sell paper. You have to do a bunch of things, but you can make a wonderful living, in being an independent contractor, being self-employed." So if Mozart did it and Beethoven did it, it's legitimate for everyone. Be proud, be loud, go for it.
Yeah. And yeah, with that, I think that we will wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I really want to thank Mike for taking the time out of his day and joining us as well. Again, I'll even put the links to any websites, everything that he'll send me after we're done here. I'll have them up within minutes into the show notes here. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. Mike, if you can wait
Yes.
1 second. Everybody have a great day, and we will be talking to you probably tomorrow night with Lou and Mary on the live.